Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're going to have a full lesson with Miracle. It's been about a year now that we have had Miracle. As you remember, when he came to us, he was pretty much skin and bones. One of our students had bought him. She had witnessed a man beating him basically unmercifully and bought him off of him on the spot in order to save him, which we salute her for doing. So we've been working with him for about a year, and as you can see now, he's starting to actually look like a horse. When he came, exactly how you would describe him would have been skin and bones and a big long neck and completely ewe-necked and completely sway-backed. And we see that in a year's time, he's really almost completely changed. Now you notice that we're lunging him with side reins as well as the shambone. This was a very, very fractious horse who would just fling his body all over the place when we first got him. In fact, the first day that we had him, he actually ran Amber down while she was leading him. So he was basically a pretty wild creature who'd been through God only knows what in his life. But he's really calmed down now, as they all do when we work them correctly and show them a little kindness. He really seems to love Amber a great deal and has really come a long way. And you can see him really trying to do the work now. And once again, we can see now, if you go back and compare this video with the previous video, while there's still a little bit of a dip there in his back behind the saddle, we can see that it's almost come up level. So that's absolutely fantastic. And of course, we can see that his neck has become quite a bit larger. He's put some top line on. He can really stretch all the way down now, and he looks starting to look much more proportionate. So once again, the lunging period here is only a few minutes. It's all it takes at this point with him to get him into a nice place. But once again, that's the reason we do have the side reins on as well, is it just helps him. He was such a fractious horse, and he would fling his head all over the place and just kind of leap around. So it kind of helps him to stabilize him. Now, once again, you see that they're very long. They're not tying his head into any position. But along with the shambone, it just helps a horse like this to get a little stabilized. And you can see here now when she canters, he's still rather unbalanced in the canter. He takes off and counter canters and cross canters and these kind of things. So he hasn't completely settled across his back in all three gaits. But it's coming, and actually she's able to canter him under saddle pretty well now. But you notice how when he does that, she just comes back to the trot once again and gets him back into a nice swinging trot. Right there is where we're looking for. Looking for that picture that looks like a ball rolling over the ground. But if you look how much steadier his gaits are now and how much more he tracks under his body than he did, it's a really good thing to go back and compare this with the previous videos of him. So you can still see that he was very broken over in the neck. This horse, his neck was literally almost split in two, so to speak. So it was very difficult to get him to stretch out, which is once again why we chose the shambone to start with him, because he just really needed to stretch that out. And that's what we always have to do with any of these horses. Now, this is an extreme case. And I try to show everyone at home these extreme cases so you can imagine what you could do with your horse if he's not such an extreme case, or if you have one of these lovely horses that have been brought over from Europe and you're beginning to wonder why it's not going so well anymore. This is often the reason, that they're just not going over their backs anymore, and then everything starts falling apart. So once again, it's an easy solve, however, for all these kinds of things, because we just have to go back to the work and start back at the beginning, like we're doing with this horse, and just fill in everything, all the gaps in his training, which is what we always have to do. So it really is not retraining, it's really just starting training all over again. But once again, we can see even with a horse like this, who was a very wild creature, once again, he was almost skin and bones. Look how regular his trot's becoming, reaching underneath the body. And he's actually strong enough to carry a rider now, which is why we're going to do a full session with him. So once again, you can see that that only took about 5 minutes maybe each way to get him to lunge and come into a nice place. So that's good. And of course, our cardinal rule with any horses that we're working is that we want to be able to get on and stretch them at the walk before we do anything else. So, and that's always my rule for when do people ask me, well, how long do I lunge horses? You know, they're all a little bit different. I would say with most horses, I end up lunging pretty much every day for about the first year. If you read the Spanish Riding School's manual, they used to advocate lunging a horse for a full year before anybody even got on him, which I do too if I were starting with a 2 or 3 year old. At least we want to be sure they're strong enough to carry us. You know, and horses do develop at a different rate, so that's why it's very important that we get a feel for what is correct, what it really feels like to have a horse coming up underneath its back, underneath your back, so to speak, and being able to support the weight. So as we can see here with Miracle, if we had just gotten on him, he's still much too fractious. He would be, you know, it would just take such a long time, and it's too much wear and tear on both horse and rider. So as I always say, when we want to lunge horses till they look like something that we might want to get on and ride, then we get on and ride them, and it's usually no problem. So if your horse is still, fractious on the lunge line, I guarantee you when you get on it, it's going to be the same way. So if we just use these simple guidelines, anybody with enough ability to walk, trot, and canter comfortably on a horse without hanging onto their mouths can train a horse. But you just have to be willing to wait for these things to happen, as we have with this one. And once again, it's taken about a year to get to this point. But look what a nice horse he's turning into. This is a horse that, you could barely lead on the ground when he came to us, and actually was quite dangerous to lead on the ground. So we can see now he's calmed down on most things outside the ring. He's got a nice 4-beat walk is happening quite nicely. It's getting pretty long. If you've seen him in previous videos, his walk was very tight and short. So he's learned to stretch out over his back and support the weight of the rider, which is what we're looking for. So that means we can start riding this horse more regularly. Now, with a horse like this, we started out riding him maybe once a week, and then twice a week, and then 3 times a week. And that's how we build it up. And we still give him days when we don't ride him at all. At this point, we just go long and low in the stretch on the lunge line. And that's very good for any horses as they're coming along. Throughout any horse's training, you're going to want to have periods of time, when you just kind of let everything back off a little bit, and that's when you feel them. If you feel your horse is getting a little stale in the work, or just like they need a mental break. We try to give them mental breaks throughout, which is the point of teaching horses to stretch. But sometimes we just need to, more than anything, just stay off their backs for a few days. Just like you and I, they say the same thing with humans. If you work out at a gym, they always say that, when you start feeling stale, you want to just give yourself a couple of weeks off. And you want to do the same thing with horses. If their backs start feeling a little stale, we want to just stay off of them for a couple of weeks and just either hand walk them or lunge them, depending on their level of fitness. But getting back to Miracle here, we can see how nice he's beginning to even do these changes across the diagonal. And he jigs a little bit, as you see there, but that's no big deal. Notice how Amber just relaxes and puts him right back into the stretch again. Just what we're looking for. Remember that we always want a horse, to look like it's having a nice hack, so to speak, as you see this one is doing. He's not reacting to things outside the ring, which certainly a few months ago he would have. Now he walks around there calmly, and he's accepted the job, and he's accepted the environment that we're in, as there's nothing in it that's going to harm him. And so he's stopped looking around for things. But this is all very good, and how we want to start every lesson with every horse is just to come out, and have that first, someone said to me the other day, let's look at it this way, they said, oh, we're casual riders. Well, I say, well, I'm a casual rider too. I always want to keep my riding casual and fun, so to speak. And yes, we want to work the horses hard, but, we never want it to just turn into this thing where we drill and drill and drill and drill, because that's why horses get sour in the ring, especially if you're holding them against your hands the whole time you're doing it. That walk work was really good with him. Notice how he just stretched out. There was no problem there. And did a few lateral movements. All we need to do. And now he's going to go into the trot. And once again, if you go back and look at the previous videos, even that we did of him riding, he was nowhere near as through, so to speak. He's actually beginning to get over his back and actually starting to move quite nicely. Now here she just has a few little bumps along the way there that he's just not quite ready to settle all the way down, as it often is with young horses. But if she were not able to get him back into a nice stretch here in a few minutes, she would have just come back to a walk. So that's what we don't just stop immediately just because the horse has a bad moment and take him back to the walk. We see how far we can go. And if we can correct it without going back to the walk, then we don't, and just stay in the trot. But had he even becoming more fractious, which is what he used to do, I would have just advised her to come back to a walk, and that's what we would have done, until he was all the way stretched out in the walk again. Remember, it's just so important that we understand that teaching relaxation, is a skill, just as it is a skill to go sideways, to do lateral work, to get their backs up, all the things that we do with horses. Well, relaxation is also a skill. So working for that and rewarding relaxation is very, very important. So you can see now here with him in the canter, he's been able to canter now without cross-firing, as you see here. He's able to stay over his back in the canter now, which would have been impossible a while back with him. And actually his canter is starting to take shape pretty nicely. Nice 3-beat rhythm, and he's beginning to stretch out the neck forward. And he had a little bobble there, but nothing that he was able to continue and come out of. So this is all really good. And for him, that's a pretty good rhythm. If you think of a horse, this horse had no rhythm at all when we started him. For him just to be able to lock into any kind of trot or canter is really, really good at this stage for him. Exactly what we're looking for. So she does the canter work and then immediately comes back to the stretch and the trot. Now notice that Amber's riding this horse with her hands quite wide. She's doing that because she's trying to get him to stretch, and this is a horse, once again, that he would fling his head around, let's put it that way. So she's able to begin to keep contact here, but yet she can, as he stretches down, she'll be able to bring her hands together, but yet she's able to maintain contact throughout, and that's what we're always looking to do. Our goal, remember, in the stretch is to stretch in the contact, not just to have the horse stretch its neck down on a loose rein. Now, having said that, remember that the correct contact is the weight of the rein with just a sort of positive sense of a feel in your hands. But it's not that, which is a very different kind of lightness than the horses that you see that are broken at the third vertebrae. They're actually just dropping their jaw off the bit. They're really not light at all. So while we don't want to have any constant backwards tension on the horse, we want to feel a positive contact into our hands. But it's pretty much the weight of the rein with just a sense of just a push forward, so to speak, if that makes any sense. So the horse accompanies you into your hand, so to speak. But all good here. Once again, she gets him into a really good stretch here. And the fact that he's been able to come out and work for this period of time, even 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and be able to maintain this rhythm. And once again, with no distractions. You notice he had one little bauble in the beginning about something along the side of the ring, but that's pretty good for a young horse like him who had so many problems and was so spooky and just kind of overreactive to everything. But we can see now that he's settling very well into this work now. Really nice in the stretch there, and she's going to try the canter again. So once again, we see that the canter is really quite nice. He's able to stretch forward in it. So the rule of thumb of when you canter is simply whether you can get the horse over its back. You just have to always remember, if the horse can't get over its back and stretch forward in the canter is just going to get worse. And no amount of cantering you're doing is going to make it better. It's only going to get worse, because the horses that, if they're cantering hollow and continue to canter hollow, they will always get sore in the back and short-strided. So that is always our rule, as with everything else. So when we get to the canter and we can keep the horse over the back the way you see this one, now we can canter to some advantage. And actually even makes a pretty nice downwards transition, stays over his back throughout that, which is quite good. I mean, we see horses in the show ring all the time who aren't capable of doing that. So for a little miracle here, that's a great job. Now you notice sometimes he comes a little behind the bit there because you can see his old break in the neck. And once again, whenever we stretch these horses, which is the only way we can correct the problems that have been caused by overflexion using draw reins or just stiff hands, as the case may be, they'll tend to want to curl back a little bit. You hear us talking about that. So it is wrong for a horse to be behind the bit, but it's a place sometimes with these horses at first we have to get before we get them to take contact and stretch the nose more out and forward, and to lengthen their whole neck from the base of the shoulder like you see him now starting to do. And once again, you see how hard Amber's working there just to stay with him and just to keep her hands a little bit wide there so she can maintain a little contact. That's all she's doing there. And just trying to keep him straight, forward and straight. Everybody's heard that, but a lot of people don't seem to understand what it really means. Forward and straight means not a lot of stopping and going backwards or pulling on the brakes, so to speak. Forward means nothing braking the front end, so to speak. No brakes on. Whereas when you ride a horse by holding against its mouth all the time, you always have the brake on. It's like driving your car with the emergency brake. I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand this, but that's basically the concept. And you're never going to get a horse, very often we see horses that are rhythmic, but if we notice, the horses are rhythmic and nervous because they're being held against the hand and then just whipped up until they have this sort of overactive kind of nervous kind of gaits that look impressive to those who don't know what they're looking at. But once you understand what it looks like to have a horse over its back and how a horse moves correctly, which is the only thing that you can actually call dressage. A horse is hollow in the back. You can't really call it dressage because that's really not what dressage is all about. Dressage was always about doing the best thing for the horse, working the horse in the best possible frame to maintain soundness, for instance, as long as possible. Now look how nicely he's beginning to stretch out here. Notice that the neck got longer. And each one of those canters actually improved this horse on this particular occasion. So that's what we're looking for. But once again, had he been hollow throughout all that cantering, and you keep cantering a hollow horse, they just end up sore and even worse. So happily, Miracle is now at a point where we can work him in all three gaits successfully. He's actually starting to show just a little bit more push up through the back there. And we notice that the cadence or the rhythm gets better. And notice how she's keeping all this to simple turns, 20-meter circles. And this actually even larger than that, as this ring is about a 30 or 40-meter circle. So once again, we don't want to be in any big hurry to get the horse doing small circles. Remember, the rhythm is, once again, what's guiding us. So if you notice the big guiding principle here throughout all this work, whatever he's done, she's kept him in a good, steady, forward swinging rhythm throughout. Once again, what does it mean to ride a horse forward and straight? So remember that, when we say forward and straight, forward engage means how to engage forward under the body, not how fast we run forward. That's a hard thing for people to understand. And of course, straightness, the horse must lift in its back before it can be straight. No amount of bending the horse from side to side will make the horse's back come up. Until the horse's back comes up. In fact, you can't bend from side to side. So that's why, once again, all the old masters used to recommend forward and straight. And what they meant by that was to engage forward under the body and go straight and lift the back so the horse can become supple without the brakes on, so to speak. Once again, if you're holding against the horse's mouth, you're not really going forward, or at least not wholeheartedly. Let's look at it that way. How much more joy there is in riding a horse that you're not just having to pound and beat into everything that you get out of him. Once again, we see so many frustrated people trying to ride horses today in all kinds of horse sports because they just simply don't understand this basic guiding principle of working a horse over its back, which I'm sure you've heard me say, and I suggest that everyone do what I have done, is go and investigate other sports and watch the best people in actual sport horses. I'm talking about saddlebreds and these kind of things, but watch the people who are the best 3-day event riders and the best jumper riders and the best dressage riders. And you'll see that all of their horses, that's the thing. You'll notice how rhythmic and relaxed they are. Watch Marcus Enning from Germany jump. His horses are more collected than most of the horses that are in the dressage show ring. And of course, he looks like he's going very slowly around the arena. But of course, he wins because his horse is actually not losing time back. So that's that same kind of example in jumping. Like when you watch people who are constantly pulling the horses back, as they're approaching the fences, thinking they're putting them on the hindquarters, but they're losing time all the time. And that's a false sense of the hindquarters. What they're trying to do is kind of over-compress the horse. But if the horse's back isn't up, that compression doesn't really work. And yes, they will spring higher off. They will spring a little harder off the ground, so to speak, for a while. But because of the trajectory that kind of riding creates over the fence, it's very hard on the horse's legs. So once again, look how few times we've stopped with this horse. Once we got a young horse into the work, we just keep swinging forward, keep getting him back over his back. But now we have everything working correctly with this horse. So now that we're at this stage, the next year will be just filling in. And next year he'll look like a completely different horse. So this is one that Amber has pretty much done all her own. She's done a great job with him rather. And with me just looking at him once a week or so to see how she's doing. So she's brought this horse along and been able to get rid of all of his problems with just doing nothing but simple lunging. But get people to understand that lunging is the foundation for everything else. Even before you try to lead a horse, if you teach them to lunge, you'll find that all of a sudden they know how to lead. Because if your lunging is correct, actually you're doing the same thing as leading a horse, and that you're staying at the horse's shoulder and sending them forward. So thinking about all that, it's a great job by Amber and Miracle. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. We look forward to seeing you next time. Keep up the great work on your own horses.